Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're located here in the country. My name is Timothy Wood with Trust Exchange, and today I have a very special guest with us. We are going to be talking about the kind of the missing piece for compliance in cannabis-related business. First, I wanted to introduce Kirk Berry of Clarion Compliance. Kirk and I met about a year ago at a conference on exactly this subject. And the conversation has produced a partnership between our two companies. Kirk, please introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending. I'm looking forward to our interaction here for a few minutes this afternoon. My background is varied. I have 21 years of experience as a law enforcement officer in the state of California. I spent a couple of decades as an expert witness in the civil litigation field, and I jumped into the cannabis sector in 2009 in California, working as a cultivator, manufacturer, started an edible company and a testing lab, all before licensing. I really wanted to embed myself in the cannabis industry so that I could better understand it. And then in 2017, I launched a compliance company that dealt specifically with non-compliance issues and waited until 2018 to launch. I wanted to make sure that the ancillary businesses that were serving cannabis were feeling the pain of non-compliance before they saw the necessity to have us.
Great. And so Clarion Compliance is the name of your company, and tell us what's the value that Clarion Compliance brings to this industry?
Well, I believe that we bring a superior compliance model to high-risk industries. So we really stand upon seed-to-sale tracking, which is very necessary. We provide independent third-party verification by utilizing effective processes to ensure the compliance of an industry and minimize critical risk factors. So if I was to boil it down even further, we focus on compliance as it relates to black market diversion, trade-based money laundering, product-based laundering, fraud, counterfeit, and legacy cash issues. And we look at the marijuana or cannabis-related business as our client, and we look at the banking industry, the insurance industry, the regulatory, and the enforcement sector as our partners.
Okay. So most of us have always said that banking is kind of the gatekeeper to the legalized cannabis industry. And is the cannabis industry, do you classify that as a high-risk industry for banking?
I do. It is high risk. It's high risk because of the black market activity that goes on within the industry itself, and that should be well published and well understood by all. And it's also a high risk industry because it's cash intensive, which is a public safety risk or factor.
So how concerned should the banking industry be regarding non-compliant activity?
I believe that the banking industry should be very concerned about non-compliant activities, as well as the insurance industry, et cetera. And I believe that the banking industry, since that's more or less the topic today, should really broaden its view of what it monitors as far as compliance is concerned. For instance, when you look at compliance in banking, it's far more than just monitoring a transaction. You don't want to do business with a cannabis company that's involved in black market activity at the same time as scrubbing its books, so you see it as compliance as far as a transaction is concerned.
Right. So let's move to somewhat current events. LA Times produced an article earlier this year that said upwards of 80% of the marijuana sold in California was from the black market. Illicit growth operations have always been a problem in California, particularly in northern coastal forests. But much of this black market product these days is actually produced through licensed growers, and the profits and sales are often laundered back to the company. Monitoring just transactions at the bank level simply isn't enough. So what's the missing piece?
Well, the missing piece, in my opinion, is a service like ours that provides boots on the ground inspections, spot inspections, uh, surprise inspections, investigations, and back end monitoring so that you can see the compliance status of the cannabis business in real time. In other words, if you simply deliver a SaaS solution and say, here, cannabis business, put your information in here for us, then you're doing nothing more than self-compliance, and that's really not enough in a high-risk industry.
All right. So if a bank or credit union knows that they need an in-person accounting of a CRB's activities, um, they'll often send one of their own employees or have a third party, such as an armored car company, perform the inspection. So do these personnel or these business entities have the experience to get a sense of the different types of laundering that's going on?
Thank you. And I believe that the phrase to focus on here is due diligence. So if you are a bank or an insurance company, you want to make sure that you are doing your due diligence as far as the cannabis business is concerned. So I would not send an armored car company out to do an inspection of a cannabis business, no more than a bank should employ me as an armored car service to deliver cash from point A to point B. You want to make sure, nor would you necessarily send an employee who is a BSA or an AML trained person or an officer. Those titles, they do very well with looking at suspicious transactions, filling out SARs, etc. But the real issue is the cannabis business being compliant? Are they declaring all of their product? How many grams per watt does a cultivation facility output, etc.? You want to make sure that compliance is being done at that time and ongoing, and you're simply not going to get there by announcing an inspection, showing up one day and performing an inspection. Anybody can put a suit on and look good for an hour and a half or 2 hours, but it's a continuous monitoring and a continuous uncovering of activities that's important.
So I've always said that the cannabis industry has a perception problem, and that the dream of a national level legalization isn't going to happen until a large part of the industry operators address this. How is your team at Clearing Compliance kind of benefiting the CRB that's doing it right and the industry as a whole?
We actually come in with the cannabis business. We consider them our clients, and we are asking them about and helping them to address all of their pain points. We're providing the assistance that they need in order to identify compliance issues and then help them solve those problems. There's a difference between willful noncompliance and non-compliance as a result of maybe not understanding the regulations or how to properly implement something. So if we can't provide a solution, there are many best-in-class, I believe, solutions out there that can address best practices, good manufacturing processes, operational procedures, SOPs, etc., that will really help the cannabis company and bolster it from a compliance perspective.
Good. So let's talk about the people at these CRBs. How are they vetted? How do we separate the responsible operators from the not so good ones? And how do the regulators themselves and law enforcement personnel keep track of all of these people that are in and out of the industry?
Sure. And here's how we vet CRBs. We look at the business, operations, sales, and finances. So we look at all four sectors of the business that have to do with compliance itself, and that will help us. I mean, it will become instantly obvious or obvious over a very short period of time who the responsible operators are. And from a regulatory and law enforcement perspective, well, the regulators and the law enforcement, their budgets are limited, their personnel are limited. They're going to come around every now and again. My understanding is that some public agencies have inspect cannabis businesses as much as 4 times a year, but that's simply not enough. It has to be a continuous monitoring, and that's what our SaaS solution does through Trust Exchange. We require certain information on a regular basis. We are monitoring on the back end, and when we see issues rise up, we're there on a scheduled or unscheduled basis to assist the cannabis company and or uncover non-compliant activities and helping the cannabis company address that, and then either tagging them as compliant or non-compliant.
All right. So we're kind of repeating this question, but what are some things that clearing compliance can do right now for a CRB to help them stay out of trouble and, of course, make a profit?
Well, sure. I don't know that we can help you, a cannabis business, make a profit necessarily, but let's talk about staying out of trouble. Well, one of the issues is compliance, and so a cannabis company, a CRB, has its own self-compliance, but really, I think what's needed today is independent third-party compliance, because you've got an unalterable set of records, and as a cannabis business, you can literally prove or establish your compliance and your cooperation with the entire process by having an independent source verify that compliance for you. So really what you're creating, if you're a CRB, is a defensible set of records to be used when the regulatory sector comes in, or the enforcement sector comes in, or the bank is looking to accept you as a client, or the insurance company is looking to underwrite a policy for you to protect you in all kinds of areas.
Excellent. And just to add to that, for a little background, in the general banking industry, there has always been kind of a difference between state level regulators and federal regulators. Obviously, the federal side is kind of an odd issue right now with this industry, but state regulators have a budget, for manning and number of people that they can use. And what happens is that they like to be selective about where they spend their time. So upfront reporting goes a long way with a state level regulator to get them in, do their work, and then get them back out of your hair.
Sure, and we come in, because we are literally boots on the ground and back end monitoring. We literally provide, let's say, the bank. We provide the bank with all the compliance information that they need. We streamline the process for them so that from a manpower perspective, they're spending far less time with the cannabis business and can focus on some of their fundamentals, maybe just look at the transactional side, knowing that we have everything else, including that, covered for them.
Right. So in my travels around the country, I've met more politicians, regulators, and law enforcement personnel that actually support legalization than those against. Even from my home state of Idaho, which has nothing legal on the books at all right now. This ultimately bodes well for the industry. What can clearing compliance do for regulators and law enforcement to kind of make them more comfortable with this process and maybe even ease the process for the politicians?
Sure, and cannabis has been around in California medically since 1996, true. So as we march down history here, it's becoming, I'm going to say, normalized, if you will, and generally accepted from a general population perspective. As far as the regulators and law enforcement is concerned, here's how we help. We do the heavy lifting for them. So as I said earlier, if you're a regulatory sector, you might not have a budget or the manpower to really monitor compliance. And that's really not, I don't know that that's the regulator's specialty and what a city or county or state wants to be doing on a regular basis. They want to be confirming the compliance of a company. The same with law enforcement. Law enforcement enforces laws. So their focus is non-compliance necessarily, an activity which is illegal. And I think it's important to move away from maybe, I'm going to call it heavy-handed law enforcement perspective, and maybe more to a non-compliance perspective. And at Clarion Compliance, we really strengthen that bridge of communication, cooperation, and information between the regulatory sector and the law enforcement sector to show basically that cannabis business is a good actor, and they're doing their best to be compliant. So we're not looking at it from a enforcement, suspend your license or revoke your license perspective.
Excellent. So we're beginning to see some kind of reputable standards organizations come out and grab this bull by the horns. In most industries, the standards creators, whether it be ISO or different standards for food products, the standard creators are not the standards inspectors or enforcers. So what's Clarion's place in this formula as these standards begin to roll out, state by state and hopefully nationally?
And standards are very important, aren't they?
Yes.
And we need to make sure that we have standards in place. And I'm going to say effective standards. Standards that really make a difference and help the consumer and public safety and all of those types regulatory issues, etc. Our place in the food chain, if you will, is we are the compliance confirmation entity or solution. So we're actually going in and understanding what is the compliance status in real time, which is important. So we're not setting the standard, we are monitoring the standard. We're helping the cannabis company comply with and comport with the standard, and that is the difference.
All right, so many CRB operators are they're pretty cagey groups when it comes to compliance and transparency. And it's how do we change their minds on this? How do we prove that a Clarion is the friend of the CRB rather than just another whistleblower?
Well, and we're kind of a combination of both, aren't we? So what we want, or what is necessary, is that a cannabis business is both compliant and transparent. Not self-compliant and self-transparent, but actual compliance and transparency. And we have the kind of relationship with CRB so that they understand, look, we're here for a few different reasons. We're here for continuous monitoring, we're here for reporting, and importantly, we're here for assistance. So the cannabis business that wants to be compliant and do everything right, is the perfect candidate for us, and we are going to come in and bolster, undergird, support their compliance efforts, and help them from our perspective or our take on things.
All right, so we wanted to do this production just to start a conversation. The banks that are involved in this industry, they're starting to get on top of this problem of reporting and compliance and what that looks like at the state level, the county level. If you're in a state where I'm at now in Pennsylvania, where it's by township, they can have different regulations. And it's a very tall problem for regulation-wise. But the part that's been left out is greasing the skids for the actual CRBs. So it's trust is a two-way street. And what we've done with Kirk and Clarion is to help him kind of allow this exchange of information to happen in a secure environment between the people who are important to the CRB on an ongoing basis. So we'd like to really thank all of you for joining us today. Kirk, any last thoughts before we close up here?
You did hit on a very important topic, which is that trust of information exchange between partners and trust of information gathered, if you will. And one of the things that I appreciate about trust exchange and the SaaS solution we have is the communication between the bank and us internally is confidential. Information comes through the pipeline. The bank itself can watch our inspection or our processes unfold right on the cannabis business's timeline. And yeah, that's an excellent point, Tim.
Great. So any next steps for clearing compliance?
We are ready to go. We are looking for partners that see the value in independent third-party compliance from a due diligence perspective, and we're ready for panels, information, discussions, providing the solution that Trust Exchange rolls out, and we're ready for the industry.
Excellent. Again, we want to thank everybody, and especially I want to thank you, Kirk, for joining us today and answering some questions for us.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for attending. I appreciate that very much.
Have a great day, everybody.